International Games Week at the table. Going to be talking about COVID and the effects of COVID on our gaming practices and the way that we play. Before we start, in the spirit of reconciliation, Arcanacon acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. And I'd especially acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations whose land I'm on today. So welcome everybody. It's great to have you joining us, and especially it's great to have our panel here today as well. We thought we'd keep this fairly light, fairly chatty, and maybe kick off with some introductions and then talk about some of the big topics that we've been facing and we've been dealing with, I suppose, over the last, I don't know how long you guys have been locked down. I worked out earlier today, it's been 31 weeks for me. So since, there was that little bit of freedom in the middle, but 31 weeks. So, yeah. Lynn, you maybe want to kick us off with an introduction and just sort of introduce yourself to our audience, and we might just each do that before we get started.
Well, good morning, everyone. I know it's good evening for you lot, but I'm on the top bit of the world. So my name is Lynn Hardy. I am the Associate Line Editor for Call of Cthulhu at Chaosium. I've been gaming for, over 30 years now, and I first started when I went to university, and Call of Cthulhu was my second game. RuneQuest was my first. And I've done all sorts, and I've worked for most games companies and most of the British ones, and, I've been in and out here, there and everywhere, which is kind of like the hokey cokey of gaming, which is pretty much what the British lockdown situation has been of late, to be fair.
Oh, well, welcome, Lynn, and thank you for joining us from much earlier in the morning, I think, than we originally thought it was going to be, thanks to moving time zones. Ben, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, my name's Ben. I've been running tabletop role-playing games as a dungeon master for actually a comparatively short amount of time, only about 3 years. But I've been doing it professionally through a company called Melbourne Dungeon Master, where we basically hire ourselves out to run games of mostly 5th edition D&D, but we have also done Call of Cthulhu or Savage Worlds and things like that before. And it's basically, drawing on a background in creative arts and creative and performance that we're able to facilitate those games. And I just find, games is something that I've discovered a little bit late in life, but I just find fascinating, to be honest, as an art form, the art of play, but also creating content for players to sort of engage with. And to that effect, I'm also on a podcast called Of Dice and DMs, which is not an actual Play D&D podcast, but it's more something intended to inspire people to play. So we kind of talk about the social constructs as well as sometimes the rules or the different issues that pop up around mostly D&D, but other role-playing games as well.
Oh, fantastic. And Ellie?
Thanks. So Ellie here. I have also been relatively new to tabletop role-playing games. I've only been playing for about 2.5 years and only started DM after COVID hit. So that's kind of my perspective on this, is I've only ever DM'd online. So that's been really interesting. But otherwise, I am the third-party content manager at Arkenforge. So all of our third-party assets and artists, I sort of deal with them. And since COVID hit, I also have really appreciated the artistic outlet, if you will, of DMing and sort of that need to keep creating something while we're kind of stuck inside. So, yeah.
Cool. And just to introduce myself, I guess, as well, I think, Lynn, you and I are kind of the dinosaurs on this panel. So my first games convention was the very first Arcanacon, and I met this guy there, and anything further than meeting one another would have been very illegal because I was quite small. But fast forward many years, we've been married for nearly 25 years now, and we don't play a lot of role-playing games anymore, but we do, as you can probably see behind me, play a lot of board games. So we've been very active in board gaming communities. For the past 6 years or so, I've been researching board games. So I'm actually a lecturer in human-computer interaction, but the interactions that I study are the interactions of play and particularly interactions of board gaming. So we've kind of got a real diversity of types of games, experience with games, length of time with games, and also the way that we play games here, which I think is really cool. For people who've just tuned in, this is our last panel for At the Table, part of Melbourne International Games Week 2020, and we're talking about gaming through COVID. I think we called it gaming with COVID, but that kind of sounds like we're all sitting in corners coughing. So let's not do that, please. So, Ellie, I wonder if you want to kind of kick us off, because one of the first things we wanted to talk about was this sense of being new to tabletop games and how people are learning and getting started with games during lockdown and restrictions. I know you said you hadn't been a dungeon master before.
Yeah, totally. So I guess the whole technical side of things kind of came naturally to me. My partner actually is part of the Arkenforge team, and so I was already pretty familiar with the toolkit when I started DMing. So that really helped a lot. And really, it's actually, I mean, aside from myself, my players, I've got I run 2 groups at the moment, and 3 players across those groups are brand new, never played any kind of role-playing game. And so it's actually been a really interesting experience, sort of being able to use these visual aids and audio aids so much more easily than I could if we were in person. And I think that's actually also made the experience for them a bit easier when you don't have to focus on all of this new system as well as the theater of the mind stuff, because it can be a bit overwhelming when you're trying to juggle both of those things as someone who's brand new. So I actually think that's kind of a benefit of doing it online and having such easy access to the digital tools that we've got.
That's interesting. Have you found that too, Ben? Because you're doing a lot of work online at the moment, I know.
Yeah, we had always known that we wanted through Melbourne DM to provide games online, but it was just something we'd never put in the work to be able to facilitate. And then COVID kind of forced us to have to facilitate games online. I think that there's, for me at the moment, like there's a lot of positives to gaming online, even though gaming in person is definitely what I'm used to. It's a lot of the same stuff, but different, if that makes sense. I'm a very visual person. I'm a very tactile person. I played war games as a kid before I was playing role-playing games. And so for me, playing D&D had a lot to do with like the miniatures and painting the miniatures and showing this big impressive dragon and each of the party members having a mini that was painted that kind of represented their character for them. That still exists in the online realm through tools like Arkenforge or Astral or Roll20 or whatever somebody's using. It's just that those assets are now digital instead of being, physical, which I think is great because there's a lot of advantages to being able to run a dungeon with Fog of War, and instead of it being lines on a grid, it is a cave or a dungeon or a forest or whatever it is. I think there is a really great audio-visual kind of element to running games digitally.
How do you find... And Lynn, sorry, jump in too if you want to add something here. But I'm interested how you find it for people who maybe haven't tried a role-playing game before or haven't played this type of game before. They picking it up? Do you find that new people are coming in through online tools? And just before you answer me, let me just say too, if you're watching us on Twitch, feel free to ask questions. Ellie's monitoring the chat stream on Twitch, so if you've got any questions, please jump in and ask away. Sorry. So back to that question about being new, right? Learning to play a new type of game.
Yeah, I think, Ellie, maybe you're better suited to answer this than me, but I guess what I quickly wanted to just jump in and say, because I haven't had a lot of brand new players come to me via online, but it doesn't seem to be stopping players from coming online. Like Arcanacon ran an event earlier in the year. We had a lot of just brand new players that had never played role-playing games before come into D&D. I think we have had a couple today as well, trying the different RPGs. So it doesn't seem to be stopping people, which is good, but sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've got quite a few new players, and one of the groups that I'm running at the moment, actually, they're not a group of people who would have come together if it wasn't for online. We all sort of don't really live near each other anymore, and they're kind of like different friends of mine from different social groups. So it's interesting to see everyone who's kind of willing to just be like, well, I mean, we can just try it. It's easy. I don't even have to leave my home for this. So I actually think that it's provided us with a great opportunity to make some new connections with people who otherwise maybe we wouldn't have. So
I mean, because of excuse me, because of my job, I mean, most of the gaming that I do now is either convention gaming or virtual gaming.
Mm-hmm.
Our gaming group fractured years ago for adult reasons and family and goodness knows what else. So yeah, I mean, so I was already doing a huge amount of gaming online anyway. Partly for playtesting, partly for just general games. We have a lovely board games cafe in Newcastle, which is pretty much one of the few places that, and Travelling Man, our lovely friendly games and comic shop, that I did actual physical gaming. But most of my world was online or, in another country at a convention.
Mm.
But we have had new gamers coming in, and it seems to depend if you manage to find something that they're interested in, then they'll come and join, they'll give it a try, because as you say, what else are you going to do? It's not that you can necessarily go and do your usual thing. You can't go to the board games cafe and play board games. You can't go to the local comic or game shop and sit around a table and do whatever. So people, I think some people who may have been nervous but fancied having a go, they're doing it because, well, why not? Certainly with doing some of the Rivers of London proof of concept games and the playtesting, we are getting new players in, partly because that's a topic that they're interested in and they're kind of intrigued. So it's just given them that little bit extra impetus to actually go, well, you know what? Yeah, let's try this.
I just have to say, I would quite gladly pretty much stop this panel now and just let you talk about the Rivers of London games for the rest of the time, because I'm really excited about them. But no, so we're seeing something similar, I think, in board games. What we're seeing there, which I think is maybe a bit different, is the classics, the kind of, I think, evergreen titles, if I can call them that, are absolutely going like the clappers. They're just out the door as soon as they come in. So titles like Catan, Carcassonne, Codenames, which is a bit newer but already quite old now. The shops can't keep them on the shelves, right? Because they're games that people have heard of. Patchwork is another one, and Patchwork particularly, I think, because it's a two-player game and there's a lot of couples who are looking for something to do, because you can't say, oh, what did you do at work, dear, anymore, when work was kind of the other side of the same table as you, and it was probably, I had an argument about, who left the fridge open at lunchtime, rather than anything interesting that you might have seen during the day. So I'm seeing this huge growth in people, and people in kind of mainstream, if I can say that, Facebook groups and things where 10 years ago, they might be saying, oh, I'd quite like to get a board game to play with my children. And 5 years ago, they might be saying, oh, we've played, these two games and we'd like one more. And now somebody says, oh, what game should I be looking for? And someone says, well, I really like Battlestar Galactica. And someone else says, oh, Terraforming Mars is really good. And there's this kind of interest in pushing it and trying lots of new games and much more awareness of games than there was. And I'm less connected these days to role-playing games, but I wonder whether you're seeing that as well, an interest in kind of either trying new settings or new game systems.
Yeah, I mean, I think, what was the saying? The nerds shall inherit the earth. And we're kind of, we're all indoor kids now in a way because we're forced to be. So I think I saw the other day, I don't know whether this is true or not, but like Games Workshop, who do war games and miniatures, their stocks like skyrocketed like 100% or something over the last couple of months. I'm sure that video games, the realm of video games, is probably seeing a similar kind of tenuous boom with the way that the world is kind of looking at the moment. And yeah, I think it's true that with RPGs, it's not just like settings or books or stuff like that. But as I mentioned before, when you move into the digital realm, people that are running their own Kickstarters or Patreons for digital assets or, Patreons for world settings and stuff like that would be going gangbusters. I wasn't signed up to a single Patreon before COVID started. And now I'm attached to like 4 or 5 of them just so I have enough content and assets to be able to run my games digitally online. So absolutely. I think there's probably, if you looked at it, there's a trend upwards across all sorts of gaming from video games to board games to role-playing games.
You're watching At the Table as part of Melbourne International Games Week, and we're talking about gaming in the time of COVID. Ellie, sorry, you were about to add something.
I was actually just about to introduce some of the questions that we've gotten from the chat, if you don't mind. So I'll just go from the top. We've got one from, I think it was from Stop Panic and Anakin. Has everyone on the panel run online games? And if yes, what did you all use? And I clarified this is mostly for board games, but also interested in what you guys have been using for RPGs as well. So does someone want to start with that?
Yeah, I can kick off. I mainly play on Board Game Arena, but I also play on Yukata or Yukata. I haven't played a lot on Tabletop Simulator. I avoid prototypes for kind of complex reasons. I'm on a couple of game juries, so I don't think it's very ethical for me to be playing prototypes that I might then be judging later. I also have played on Brettspielwelt in the past quite a lot. So lots of different platforms. It really tends to depend more on what game I want to play than on, what platform I feel like playing. We're playing a lot of The Crew at the moment, and that's on Board Game Arena, for example. So I'm playing there. I did some research that I'll probably talk about later on an older game called El Grande, and for that we played on Yukata because that's the site that has that game. Yeah. How about the rest of you?
Yeah, I actually have found that my favorite types of games to play are the ones that you don't need any kind of app for. It's just you get in a Zoom chat and you got some paper or a little whiteboard or something, and they're guessing games and those kinds of things. And I don't know, I just find them to be like unadulterated fun, So I think that's probably my preference when it comes to this. There's a couple of games that you can play online well, but I don't know, especially with family and people who are not tech savvy. I think that's been the most fun for me.
We tried Tabletop Simulator kind of early on and was successful with that, playing big games. Like we had just bought a box copy of Twilight Imperium, which is a huge game that I'd been wanting to try for years, and then COVID happened and we haven't been able to play it. So we tried that through Tabletop Simulator, which went fine. I know friends have used it as well. In terms of D&D and role-playing games, I need that tabletop. I'm not great with theatre of the mind, particularly because I'm fairly rules heavy, coming from a war game background. So I've tried everything from Astral. I tried Roll20 briefly. There's like 3D virtual tabletop, I think, is another one. What I've settled on is Arkenforge, mainly just for the ease of use. And also because we have a great relationship with Arkenforge as well. And usually I'm using Zoom for my communication with my players. So I'm I have a separate computer that I use for Arkenforge. Obviously not everybody's going to have access to that. But share screen the Arkenforge computer into a Zoom program. And that's basically how I'm able to share it with friends. And then the other thing just quickly is that we're seeing, I think, a real merge sometimes of like video games and board games as well. I'm an avid video game player as well. And just like, I don't need to like sell this game to anybody, but it's called Among Us. And it just reminds me so much of something like, Avalon or The Resistance or something like that. It feels like a board game, even though it is more of a video game. And so I think these kind of hybrid games that are kind of a little bit of both, I know that things like I could be wrong about specific titles, but I think, what am I thinking of? Like Carcassonne or Ticket to Ride or something have digital versions of themselves as well that are kind of sold as video games. So they're also, I mean, all of these things you kind of have to purchase if you're on a budget, but they're all great, to be honest.
I should also say I obviously use the toolkit, the Arkenforge toolkit, for all of my DMing as well.
Are you contractually obligated to say that?
I'm not, and I told her
you're
that I'd
not.
be all over the phone.
I'm not either. It really is a handy tool, though. The sound effects always get a nice, like, ooh, like that's immersive.
to give just a quick scaled kind of look for people who might have different situations, the Arkenforge toolkit is great, but you do need a light kind of gaming computer to be able to run it effectively. Like I wasn't able to run it on my MacBook Pro or Air previously. Ellie, you could correct me if there's kind of they're making it for that. But if you're kind of at the lower end, like Astral and Roll20 run straight out of a browser, 3D Virtual Tabletop you can run on a phone or a tablet. So there are other options if you don't have all the equipment or access to all the equipment to be able to run kind of the higher end apps.
Someone in the comments has just said that they use PowerPoint. Sorry, continue, Lynn.
Right, there you go, yeah.
Yeah.
I actually recommended that to someone this week.
Yeah, you have to use what works for you in your particular type of game. Oh, I've been across all sorts of things. So I have used Hangouts, Meet, Discord, which I'm greatly happy that they put in video, because I'm a visual and kinesthetic learner. So audio only I found really difficult to focus. My mind wanders off. That's why I don't listen to audiobooks or watch actual plays a lot. So we got to that one. The video chat in Facebook, we've used Zoom, obviously. In terms of whatever is available that everyone can get at. So we've tried most things to just find a nice stable platform. We don't tend to use the video inside Roll20 because we found that because the sort of group sizes and various different levels of connectivity, it didn't stand up particularly well. But then we've had that problem with most platforms other than Zoom. I've been here, there, and everywhere with that. In terms of actual sort of tabletop gaming things, really, I've only used Roll20. And that was fine for me running Golden Sky Stories because really all I needed was a screen where I could have the players moving tokens around because you give each other tokens. And as long as I had something that I could visually represent that was great. Quite often when we've been running Call of Cthulhu, the Rivers of London bits and bobs, we haven't used anything. We haven't even used a gaming platform. It's just been a video chat. Because I trust my players to roll their dice. If they really want to cheat, they're going to do that. I don't mind. We're there to tell the story. Yeah, dice fudging is absolutely fine if it helps the story along. There was one game I did play in by Callum of the Released podcast, which is his Paris Gondo game, and that was using a virtual whiteboard, the name of which, for the life of me, has just gone completely out of my head. But that's quite handy again if you... Sorry,
would it be Miro? Miro, Miro, is quite a common.
Yeah, and that was really handy if you've got lots of things and you need a big area for shuffling things round. But it's a case of try them. If they work for your group, stick with them, because not every platform is going to suit every type of game or every gamer. And as you say, technological savvy, familiarity, that's all an important part of it. And certainly if you are gaming with new gamers, as technologically simple as possible is often the way to go, because then all they're having to worry about is getting used to gaming rather than gaming and a platform and whizzing between screens and various other different things as well.
One of the things that my research always comes back to is the importance of the bits, right? The physical dice, the physical components of a game, particularly a board game. And that's something people talk about missing during lockdown. I know one of my daughters played a dexterity game with her cousin on a Zoom call, which was a bit gorgeous. But how are the rest of you kind of accommodating for that feeling of missing pieces, or is that just not a thing?
I mean, Exactly like Lynn said a moment ago about not being too fussed about players fudging dice. We've used Avray for the ArcanaCon events that we've run this year online, and that seems to work great. I think if people are kind of, younger audiences that are digital natives that are kind of used to digital tools like that are going to adapt to that sort of stuff pretty quickly and maybe not miss the dice so much. But, I have players in my regular groups that have, cultivated sets of metallic and multicolored dice, and their lucky dice and their unlucky dice and their dice jails and all of that wonderful stuff. So from that perspective, at least, you can still roll dice. And, I don't check the players' dice that they've rolled what they've told me they've rolled when I'm at the table anyway. So I'm not going to be fussed about checking it over Zoom or Discord or whatever it is. And then, again, just like I said before, replacing those kind of physical miniatures. I mean, I still paint miniatures. I still miss, plonking that honkin' big dragon down on the board and having all the players go, oh. But the flip side of that is in Arkenforge, again, I'm going to be talking about it a lot, you have the ability to hide things so that the players can't see it. And so you can hide traps. And today, as part of the D&D event, we ran the Zarin Thorul fun run, which was this trapped kind of goblin race through a goblin city, and there were these massive spikes that jumped out from the side of a wall, and the players knew those spikes were there. They were like, oh, we better be a little bit careful. They thought they'd poke out maybe, a couple of squares, but they fill almost the entire map, and every time I would make them visible, without fail, the first time the players saw them, they were like, whoa! Oh, gee, lucky we dodged out of the way of that, or, oh God, I've got caught in the, in the trap. So, that digital element still facilitates the bits, so to speak.
Yeah, I guess for me, the dice thing is not a big deal. And actually, just quickly going back to our point earlier, all my new players don't have dice. So the virtual dice rolling is actually great. You don't have to spend, and not that dice are expensive, but, if it's a barrier for someone, all of a sudden it's not, I guess. But I suppose when it comes to miniatures and stuff, I always have my players send me or have them draw. A lot of my players like to draw their own characters. So once they've drawn them, I actually will cut them out, or if they just send me a picture or something, I'll cut them out or create a nice big picture of them that I can put in different scenes. And then I also create a token with their character as well. So that personalized kind of nice feeling of feeling like you're in the game still. I know it's not a tactile thing per se, but I don't know, I think a part of the tactileness is that it's yours because your fingers are on it or something. So, you get that sort of personalization in other ways, I guess, when you're digital.
Yeah.
Just super... Sorry, go ahead, Lynn. I was just going to say super, super quickly, just something interesting that you spruiked in my memory, Ellie, was the idea of digital rollers. I actually can't stand when they're used at physical tables. I much prefer players to use real physical dice if we're playing in person. I don't know if I'm still going to have that hang up after we're allowed to play in person or not, but time will tell, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've obviously we've had people using dice rolling apps. Online, we've used inbuilt apps in platforms like in Discord. I've used the one in Discord. Not that I've set them up. We've usually went to the people who've set them up. But, a lot of the time when we've just been using video platforms, no gaming platforms, we have, I was waving my dice bag. I have my dice. We've all been rolling. And, we are old gamers. Oh, very nice. This is the tiny fraction I hasten to add after 30 years of collecting.
These are all the dice I have.
Huge. So, it depends on... It's just a matter of preference again, isn't it? We tend to roll the dice physically for Call of Cthulhu games, largely because we're doing pure video platforming and we don't have a dice app inbuilt. We did when I was testing Children of Fear. We were using a web one, but that was another window to worry about. So we kind of gave up and just went back to rolling the physical dice.
Mm-hmm.
Talking with board game designers, one of the concerns that often comes up is that sense of splitting people's attention, and that if they're paying attention to their phone to roll a die or to check something, they're likely to check other things on their phone as well. So there's this concern that it takes them away from the game. The thing that seems to be universal though when I've travelled is, do you guys use the Chiwazi app at all? It's this app where everybody who's playing a game just puts their finger on the phone screen and then the phone picks who is the start player, right? Really simple, but that seems to be almost ubiquitous, and then that's almost a symbol to put your phone away because now we're going to be playing at the table.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. It kind of ties into one of the other questions that we've got, so maybe I'll ask that next. But I mean, I as a player have found that to be difficult. You know, I'm playing at the same place where I work, and if a work message comes through, especially, that's even more difficult, I think, to ignore. But I don't know. I think like once you've closed all your, you've just got to practice closing everything else down and really saying like, this is my time that I need to spend on the things that I want to do and the fun things. And it's really immersion breaking, especially if you're playing tabletop RPGs, to sort of be in and out. And it can also ruin it for other people if you're not focused and you don't know where you are and stuff like that. So honestly, maybe it comes down to discipline. I don't know. Is that like a too serious of a thing to say about gaming?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I'm a bit of a hypocrite when it comes to this because I much prefer being the DM, Like when I started playing role-playing games, I DM'd my third session of playing anything ever because I was just like, I want to be all the characters. I don't just want to be one. And I later, I've DM'd probably 93% of the games that I've played in total. So I've played as a player very, very little amount of the time. And I think I should do it more to kind of get that view of the table. But I'm very like, no phones at the table and immersion, and we're all telling this story together and it's amazing and we're all getting emotionally invested. And then when I'm a player, I find that I get distracted so easily. Like I want to check my phone. If we're playing online, I want to just, open a web browser or something like that. I think maybe you're right, Ellie. Maybe it is a lack of discipline or not being used to not being engaged all the time, which the DM often is. I don't know.
I think having children taught me to ignore the background noises. And the story that goes with that is that almost a fraction over 20 years ago, my first daughter was 2, and we were at ArcanaCon and we were playing a number of games, and she was getting a bit fed up of being at the con. And we were playing this game with friends, and we lived not too far away from the con, so we decided that we would move the game to our house. And so there were half a dozen adults sitting around in the living room playing this game, and we set her train set up for her. We've got an open plan house, and we set the train set up kind of in the dining room just near the kitchen. And we could hear her, and we were like, oh, it's so delightful because we're role-playing and she's role-playing, because she was telling this story about, oh no, Thomas is stuck in the snow. Oh no, what are we going to do? Which she had on a Thomas DVD. And it wasn't until we finished our session and we got up that we realised that props are important to 2-year-olds as well. She'd got a 2-kilo bag of flour and tipped it all over her train set to make the snow for Thomas. So maybe we shouldn't have ignored her quite so much at that point.
That's pretty good. Would you like me to ask the next question then, if we are going on from there? So it's, as DMs, do you find it more difficult in an online environment to build atmospheres of suspense and or horror? And this actually might be a good one for Ben to start with, because I know that that's your favorite type of game to run.
Yes. Yeah, no, I love, the sort of D&D that I run is definitely much more grounded, much more serious. It does lend into kind of horror and tragedy. Because, I believe, like I said, when I introduced myself, I believe in the art of role-playing games and their ability to provide more experiences than just kind of the wacky hijinks that they can sometimes be brushed with broadly. And no, I don't necessarily find it harder to create atmosphere of horror online because the tools that I have in an online game is the audio visual. The vampire or the monster or the ghoul is not this big on the table, but it's actually, it can be this very detailed, large image. And also because there's no chance of me being misheard. One of my real gripes with playing in game stores, and I don't hate game stores, I don't hate cons, I think they're fantastic, but one of my gripes of playing in a public space like that is when I'm role-playing a character, I'm like, it is very important that you all listen closely to the, and I have someone at the back go, What? I can't quite hear you. You have to speak up. Because they can't hear over the noise of the con. With this fantastic contraption in front of me, I can get in deeper and I can go, you hear footsteps approaching from the back of the room, and you can build that atmosphere kind of getting closer to the mic or getting further away from the mic, to create different effects. So, it is different, but I don't necessarily find it harder. I suppose on one hand, though, it's a matter of the players, whether I don't know if they've got other windows open, so I don't know if they're getting engaged themselves, I suppose, is the flip side.
And I mean, as a Cthulhu person, Lynn, I'm sure this is probably...
Yeah, no, I mean, this is actually a question that comes up a lot with sort of Cthulhu gaming. It's the fact that, you're all over the place. It might be bright sunshine outside like I've actually got today. Yay, sunshine. But, it's a case of how do you build atmosphere when you've not got everybody around you and you've got that sort of group feeling building, that group atmosphere and tension building, and you can do it, but again, you've got to pay attention to your vocalization, your descriptions. So you really have to think, the sights, the smells, the sounds. It's slightly harder to do sound effects if you're not using a platform, but banging on the desk and getting my microphone close to it looks really weird on a video, but it sounds quite good. So you just have to pay that little bit more attention to how your descriptions are used and how you're sort of like describing the scenery, and making sure that you are engaging everyone's senses, in their imagination. So what does it smell like? What does it sound like? Things like that. I mean, my standard thing of I'm never going to beat the atmosphere that I enjoyed as a player when we played 10 Candles in the early hours of the morning in October in the basement of a German Schloss in their beer cellar, and as the lights went out you could hear the actual real mice scrabbling around in the background. We're all huddled under blankets freezing to death. So you're never going to get that kind of an atmosphere online or pretty much anywhere else in the world, to be fair. But you can go a long way towards it by thinking about, well, what are the background sounds? How do you feel? What is the temperature, the lighting conditions and things like that? And hopefully players will be engaged and you'll be able to go into the whole theatre of the mind thing.
I actually... one thing that I really enjoy about the online space and the digital tools that I have access to, I can forge the Master's Toolkit, are the sound effects. Because, I've never had to say, and as you walk in, you hear a low rumble. I just click the button, it plays a low rumble, and everyone's like, oh my god, did I hear something? And I'm like, I don't know, did you?
I have this weird generational thing which will possibly only appeal to Brits, or be understandable to Brits, is the fact that when we were starting gaming, your sound effects were basically the BBC Radiophonic Workshop discs and tapes, which invariably were awful. So you kind of didn't use them, because they were tricky to use because it was a tape and you were having to cue them up, or make your own mixtape of sound effects. And also they weren't that great, lots of them. So it's something that I've never really gamed with, and I know that there are various companies, including Sirenscape and things, who do absolutely amazing ones. But I've still got this whole sort of cultural flashback things when they were awful. So I just tend to avoid them, and it's a whole other layer of technology that I'm then having to worry about having to deal with as well.
That's why I didn't use. Sorry, lost Ellie.
Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yeah, but we can't hear Melissa.
Cool. No, you still cut out, Melissa.
Still muted.
Should I ask the next question while we wait for Melissa to come back in?
Just the one thing that I was quickly going to say
sure.
was that I'm kind of in between the two of you, where I still do, sound effects myself, partly because I'm just in the habit of it. Like today running the games, Dante went in and put into the Ark and Forge toolkit all these great sound effects of dogs barking and growling and things. And I got halfway through the first game before I even realized they were there, because I was just doing the growling and barking and stuff myself. And again, if you've got an all right microphone, you can kind of manipulate it, and you hear a scratching coming from the other, and you can kind of do stuff like that. Like you said, Lynn, banging the table and getting the microphone close. So there's a lot of, you just got to be a little bit creative, I suppose.
Am I back?
Yes, you are.
You are. Yes, we can hear you now.
Awesome. So one question that I had about this is because I think about, the subjects that I'm teaching and the time that it takes to prepare lectures and things. Do you find that it takes a lot longer to prepare for online sessions than for your face-to-face sessions?
Yes.
Depends on what I'm running. Call of Cthulhu, no. Pretty much exactly the same amount of time, because I'm not using a gaming platform. Golden Sky Stories, tons. Because I was running that. We'd started at the beginning of lockdown. We started watching, and we're having a Saturday night movie night. Because 4 times a year we would go down to Leicester, we would meet up with old university and old LARPing friends. We would have a board games weekend. We'd stay there all the time. So of course that's not happened this year. And to keep in touch with everyone, we've been watching Ghibli films. We started watching the Ghibli films. And partway through it was like, it'd be nice to do a game that was just like this. And I went, funnily enough, I have one. So I ran that for a couple of groups. And because of the way it was, that did take a lot more game prep than I would necessarily do if I was running it live. And actually, I'm really looking forward to being able to go and run it face-to-face in person with someone, just to compare the two. But again, it's going to depend on the system that you're using and the platforms that you're using as to how much or little prep time you're actually going to need for your game.
Yeah, I haven't obviously done it in person, so maybe I can't compare in that sense, but I find that using like pre-made maps is actually really effective. And sometimes there's things in these images, like I use a lot of scenes as well as pre-made maps and stuff, and sometimes there's something in the scene or the map that I didn't even notice, but my player's like, oh, what's that thing in the corner over there? And I'm like, oh yes, that old chestnut, we know all about the the gem of I don't know, eternity or whatever it is. But yeah, so I don't know, I found that really helps me, because I'm not the kind of person who's going to spend 12 hours a week prepping. I just don't have that kind of time. So yeah, I don't know, using those really, really helps to cut down on the digital time. But otherwise there is organization that goes into it. Like with the sound effects and making sure that you've got everything laid out that you need, all the pictures saved that you need and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was an over prepper before lockdown kind of started. I basically, if I'm running from a module, I virtually rewrite the entire module out in my own shorthand, so I know where to look. So, and you can tell the difference between me running it from my own shorthand, where it's very quick, it feels off the cuff, it feels improvised, and when I'm doing it from a module, because I'm like, hold up, I just got to find the bit. Previously, I wasn't the kind of dungeon master that drew the whole map out. Like I've been saying that I'm tactile, but I wasn't drawing the whole map out. I wasn't bothering to go that far. It was all very theatre of the mind until combat or something kind of specific came up. But the problem that I've found with doing it online is that because I'm using pre-made maps or pre-drawn maps or something like that, I end up making the whole dungeon, because when it's a grid with, wet markers or something like that, combat starts, great, you just draw whatever it is, it can be anything. But if it's an image that's relatively limited in what it is, it can only be that one image, and if you're using a program that allows you to pretty easily, create things off the cuff, I know Ark and Forge can be used as a whiteboard, and, using PowerPoint or something like that, you could probably do it. But I don't like making players wait, I suppose. It's probably like a self-conscious thing. So it's changed the way I prep, because I focus less on kind of what's going on in the dungeon from an intellectual point of view, and more like I grab a dungeon from online, I smack it down, and I go, what's in this room? What's in this room? What can I see on the image? Okay, that's what's in here. My fiance hears me complain about it endlessly, that I'm like, it takes so long to prep a map and build it. But the truth is, it's also kind of like The Sims. You get carried away really easily, and you're like, I need to put this pen on the desk because this guy's got an office with pens on the desk, and he's got, here's the container for his pens. Like, you don't need that. Keep it simple. But yeah,
sometimes you do, but
sometimes, hey, if it's a clue, sometimes you do.
Yeah.
But if you only put the pen there, then they know it's a clue. So then you got to put everything else down to make sure they don't know what the clue is necessarily. So it definitely creates a lot more prep time to get those maps. If you're going for kind of high production value, so to speak, it has taken me a lot more time.
As far as teaching, I can tell you some stats which I think apply in this situation. They estimate that generally to prepare a lecture takes about 3 hours per hour of delivery. To prepare a lecture for active learning, which I think is effectively what we're doing, right, when we're preparing for a role-playing game, takes about 9.5 hours for every hour of delivery. So in other words, for every hour that you're lecturing or that you're running the game, you've probably spent up to about 9.5 hours getting things ready and getting things prepared. So,
yeah, accurate.
And when we ask ourselves, why do I feel so stressed? Why do I feel so busy when maybe I'm not traveling as much or I'm not going out as much? Maybe that's one of the reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have another question there?
Yeah, I was just about to ask if you wanted me to ask another one. So we've kind of touched on this, but it says, have you found that you or any of your players have less energy or focus for games? And does that change anything in the way you play? I know I'm struggling with the Melbourne quarantine fog.
Hi, Melbourne quarantine, foggy person, I'm with you. And I will say, we've got a couple that we play games with a lot, and we usually play kind of medium-heavy board games. So, one of our favourites is a game called Concordia. And during lockdown, when we meet to play games online, we're playing Six Nimt, we're playing Ink and Gold, we're playing Can't Stop. This week we played The Crew. We're not even getting to kind of lightish games like Castles of Burgundy. We just want to play something that's light and maybe focus on the conversations that we're having while we're playing the game as well. Similarly, my husband and I play a lot of heavy games, or medium heavy games with one another. That's not a euphemism. Haven't done that since April. We just haven't had the time to commit to actually playing, or the energy to playing a heavier game. But it's kind of been nice because we've explored some lighter games along the way. Lynn, you were nodding a lot there. Is that...
I mean, it's one of the interesting things, and what we've sort of seen is at the beginning everybody was really, really keen, and they were volunteering for virtual conventions, and they were running tons of stuff. I mean, certainly I've done way more tabletop gaming over the course of the last 6-7 months than I have for a while outside of a convention, where I tend to cram it all in my one weekend of not, being able to do gaming. And what we are starting to see is that we're getting, in some cases, fewer volunteers to GM at virtual conventions. We're getting fewer players because it's very focus intensive. It requires a lot of concentration to do this sort of thing. People are getting tired. And then on top of that, you've got the whole exhaustion from everything that's going on around you, just the lack of enthusiasm, the sort of like the difficulty concentrating, the fact as well that people are trying to play online games in the same way that they played face to face, which you can't do. Trying to maintain the concentration necessary for video conferencing, let's face it, over 4 or 5 hours, that's exhausting. It's utterly exhausting. So what some of the things that we're seeing is that people are struggling with focus because of world events, trying to maintain what we would call sort of like standard gaming practices in an environment that doesn't really suit them. Short and light works better than long, really intense. And if you do want to do intense, knock your time back. If you're doing light and fluffy, maybe you can do a little bit longer. Just, accept the fact that concentrating on multiple screens and not being able to read body language, so you are concentrating even harder to make sure that you're reacting appropriately, is utterly exhausting on top of everything else. So, be gentle with yourselves.
And with your players. I mean, I had a player just the other day who messaged our group before the session and just said, hey, I'm like kind of feeling tired. Like, just so you know, like, is it cool if we just like have a chilled sesh, basically? And I, as the DM, was like, yeah, cool. Let's have a chilled session. And I decided that we would all kind of tell a bit of a story, a backstory for our character. And I gave them, 3 minutes at the beginning just to say, like, hey, just have a think about it. Just, don't worry too much about it. And rather than putting everyone on the spot, I thought it would be a bit easier to give them some time. And it was actually a really nice session. It really did feel like we were sitting around a campfire, just telling stories as our characters. And that was just a really nice way to kind of ease into the game.
Yeah, we started this lockdown, I think, with similar enthusiasm as you described, Lynn. We, as I mentioned earlier, we started playing Twilight Imperium through Tabletop Simulator. And if you haven't played Twilight Imperium before, that is a game that goes all day and night if you wanted to. And what's more, originally we were playing it with kind of like anywhere between 3 to 6 players. So a 3-player game tends to go a bit quicker over an afternoon. We were like, well, we're not constrained anymore by the bounds of physical reality. We could have anybody play with us. So let's get So we ended up with these big 6-player games that went the whole day. We were playing Vampire the Masquerade, which was absolutely fantastic. I love vampires. I love masquerades. So it's perfect. But the problem was, for me, that's not the way we were running it. Wasn't heavily audio visual, and it was like that kind of exhausting, like the number one complaint I hear from people is I'm on my computer all day, I'm at my desk all day, I'm conferencing all day.
Yeah.
I don't want to be doing it in the afternoon. And so that's why we've kind of, as a group, I think it's the unspoken reason. Hi, everyone. I think it's the unspoken reason we as a group have changed to playing a game like Among Us, where the rounds go for 5 minutes and it's quick and you can drop it in and out at any time. You're not kind of committed for hours at a time. You don't have to think too hard about it. So, yeah, I think that exhaustion is definitely starting to set in. Yeah, we've had groups drop off because they're just exhausted of playing online.
Couple of other things that I might add too. I've just run a research study where we got people playing a game called El Grande, and we got them playing online, and that made me realise was that there are different kinds of effort that you put into your game sessions. So there's the effort that you put in while you're playing, but there's also all the coordination effort that happens beforehand of actually getting people organised and making sure that people are online at the same time and making sure that people haven't accidentally leant on their mute button like I did earlier. And, going through all of those kind of management activities is tiring as well, and it's particularly tiring because we've been doing it all day in many cases at work as well. And then you've got the what are we going to play game, which, by doing a study with one specific game we took out. If you're playing a campaign, that goes. But the whole thing about, what are we going to play? I don't know. What do you want to play? What do you want to play? And that can kind of easily eat half an hour, which in face-to-face gaming probably isn't much. But, at the moment it can be, a third to a quarter of your allocated gaming time. The other thing that I was just going to mention that came out of some research we did on why people go to conventions is that sense of a time apart, right? One of the things that people really like about going to conventions is that they're not at home, they're perhaps not with their usual gaming group, and they're away from all of those daily distractions, right? The need to feed the kids, I don't know, because either they're being babysat or you've just brought food for them already, so you've thought about that already. The need to do the laundry, all of those things that just kind of keep happening. It's really quite unfair, I think, that we have to keep cleaning our houses. But you're constantly doing that, and you can't ignore it when you're physically seated in the room with the evidence, like you can if you've gone away to a convention. And I think that is actually a really interesting thing that we're seeing now, is that we don't have that escape from our home and from our day-to-day life.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is one of the reasons I like going to conventions. Obviously, gaming is my life; it's my career. I enjoy doing the online gaming things in the evenings and at weekends with friends. But yes, conventions were got me out of the house, which was much needed. Sometimes I did not cross the threshold from weekend to weekend, and it's even worse now. But also, that is usually when I get my opportunity to play, because I'm usually running things. So conventions were great because I would get to go out and try other games because they were there and I didn't have to go make that extra effort to go find them. So yeah, I do miss conventions. I miss seeing people and being with people. I miss going to interesting places. But it was a point that Ben made earlier, actually, is the fact I don't miss not being able to hear what my players are saying, because I have a hearing issue where if there's a lot of background noise, I find it very difficult to hear what people are saying. But also, running one game and then having no voice left for the rest of the convention.
Yeah.
So not having to bawl across a table against the background noise of a general convention room, as that's one of the really good things about it.
And there's no con crud afterwards.
There's no con crud afterwards, no.
But hey, at least you don't have the commute anymore. That's the one advantage is I used to go with a heavy backpack and a suitcase for all the miniatures and computer equipment and stuff I used to take to my games. And that's one thing I don't miss and I'm not looking forward to getting back to. Yeah.
This actually leads really nicely onto another question, if you don't mind me kind of coming in with that one. So it says, does online gaming offset some of the negative effects of COVID on mental health? Do left me a mental health question. So maybe there's some kind of interesting studies that you know about, Melissa.
Look, I can't point to specific studies, but I can say that there's a lot of publicity given to negative effects of technology, and a lot of people talk about all the bad stuff about the way that we use technology. What we don't talk about as much, and I think is just as important, is how positive technology can be in our lives. And, at the moment, technology is keeping us connected to the people that we love and the things that we love doing. And I think in that way, it's very, very important and it's very, very healthy for us. Gaming of all kinds is digital now. And I say that with a great deal of love and affection, right, for my board games back here. But there are digital practices that surround our offline hobbies, right? We research games online. We keep track of the games that we play. We talk about the games that we play. We share photos of the games that we play. We can be very, very active online. And so we can kind of keep our hobby alive, if you like, through this time because we are able to engage it online. I think, if I can tell an anecdote, I bought my first gaming console this year, maybe my second because we bought a Wii for the kids about 11 years ago, but I bought a Switch and I bought Animal Crossing, and I can tell you that's what got me through March and April, right? And I don't play it as much anymore, but actually getting on and having little parties with friends, and I realised one day I was laughing at something my friend had done when she visited my island, and I thought that's actually the first time I've laughed this week. And so I think all of these different types of gaming can actually feed in and support and sustain our mental health and our emotional health.
Yeah, I'm playing Ghost of Tsushima at the moment, and it's the most great outdoors I've seen all year, with the leaves falling down from the trees. I don't I don't have any research or anything in front of me to kind of point to, although I would say with 99% what am I trying to say? I would say with a high level of certainty that research would exist if you wanted to kind of dig into it. But role-playing games, human connection is the reason I play role-playing games. It's the reason that I like to strike a darker tone with my games than the kind of, again, wacky hijinks that they can get kind of a reputation for, is because wacky hijinks is great, don't get me wrong. but like that ability to connect with someone and express yourself and express feelings that like, hey, I'm really sad or I'm struggling with this. It can be cathartic, you know, to drive your battle axe into the head of the goblin king who slighted you for whatever reason. But you get to, like, in all honesty, say, you killed my mother and I'm back for revenge, you know, and what you're really talking about is you got a ticket from the ticket inspector or something. I don't know, but, you know, like it's an avenue through which you can safely express yourself and explore parts of your personality that you might not be able to do. You know, it might not be socially acceptable in other circles. And I think I would hypothesize, to not make any absolute statements, that is a positive thing for mental health, absolutely. And just, you know, again, human connection with other people.
Definitely the human connection angle. I mean, I'm a terrible hugger, so I am really missing the physical contact. But, you know, obviously, me and, you know, Melissa, we're old. So, you know, we remember the time before you could do this. And just the thought of having to go through something like this without the ability to digitally connect and stay in touch with friends is just horrific, because we have been able to maintain these social contacts, in some cases make new ones, strengthen existing ones, diversify them so that we're dealing with new and interesting people. And this is one of the positive points I was going to add for things that have been positive, is the fact that in a lot of cases, we've been able to digitally attend things that you wouldn't physically have been able to attend, either because of cost or scheduling. So, you know, there is a huge amount of positiveness there, because we have been able to stay in touch and talk to people and enjoy our hobby and share our loves with each other that we wouldn't have been able to do if this had happened 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of on that quickly, you know, in running the Dungeons and Distancing stuff we did earlier in the year, and this with the Melbourne International Games Week, and there's another ArcanaCon event coming up in, I think, 2 weeks' time with the Goblins of Zarth. We're finding that we're getting engagement, I believe, from people that might not have come to a physical ArcanaCon, who are from regional Victoria or other states in the country or other countries entirely, that are kind of connecting with us here, which I think is really great.
So if I can jump in.
Anecdotally, certainly. Oh, go on.
No, you go, Lynn, and I'll finish up.
Yep. So, yeah, I mean, you know, I wouldn't normally go to Gen Con. I was running a game at Gen Con. I know other people who've attended Gen Con games who could never have afforded to go, or because the logistics of travel were just, you know, not possible under normal circumstances. From the Northeast Egyptological Society, they've had wonderful attendance. To take it to a completely different place, they've had wonderful attendance from all over the country and all over the world for people who would not normally be able to attend their talks. So yeah, it has, like, this is what I was saying about the diversification and the broadening. It's allowed people from all over into spaces that they wouldn't necessarily have been able to access physically.
If I can add to that too, I've got 2 different research projects that I'm running at the moment, one to do with games, one nothing to do with games. And without wanting to be kind of hopelessly Pollyanna-ish about this, without wanting to be really, really, everything's wonderful, because it's not, it's horrible. We've actually found really great things. So one was a study we're doing with people with myalgic encephalomyelitis, or ME/CFS, which a lot of people know as chronic fatigue syndrome. And we were actually able to involve lots of people who are living with chronic fatigue syndrome in our research, in workshops, because they didn't have to use all of their energy just to come in, right? They could just turn on their computer, and all we were asking them was to be available for up to 45 minutes at a time. And so that became a really positive thing about that research, was that we had much wider participation than we otherwise would. My gaming study that we did using of people playing El Grande, we watched them playing El Grande on Yukata, so online. And what that meant was, first of all, we got huge amounts of data from the session. In the past, we would get people to come into our lab and watch them playing a game and kind of film it, and we'd have one film of the whole session. From getting them to play the game online, we ended up with individual video of each person and being able to ask each person questions at different points during the game. What do you think's going on now? What do you think about what Ellie just did? How would you interpret that? Who do you think is winning? And so we gathered an enormous amount of data. And as I think Lynn just said, we also were able to get a much more specialised group of players. So we had participants from all over the world, from Europe, from Australia, from North America, from New Zealand, playing this game. And therefore we got people that actually knew more about the game or were more experienced with the game. So the quality of the data that we got was higher in that way as well. And so just by exploring kind of how we could do things slightly differently, the pandemic has kind of opened us up to new ways of doing things as well. And I think we're going to talk about this anyway, but some of that is things that we might take forward even kind of into, what do they call it, COVID normal, right? Post-pandemic.
Yeah, I have some groups that are dying to get back to being in-person groups. We've had some groups that have stopped playing with us because they, what we've kind of discussed in terms of that lockdown fog and fatigue of being online and just not feeling as engaged with the game as it's happening. And they are absolutely desperate to get back in person to start playing those games around the table again. But then we have groups that I'm kind of wondering, like it hasn't been stated yet either way, but they seem to be enjoying the online kind of way of playing a lot. And I kind of wonder whether we will continue to play online even when being in person becomes an option. And I think it's also, as we've talked about, like connecting different people from across the country and across different countries. I think there are gaming groups that have sprung up that come from areas that they couldn't physically get together. I think that existed before COVID, but I think that's maybe increased in numbers with COVID. And so I think those groups are going to continue on even after after the locks are taken off our doors.
Yeah.
One of the things we are going to have to... Sorry, go on.
No, you go ahead, Lynn. You go.
I mean, sadly, and this is a slight downside of things, is obviously there may well not be as many spaces for us to go back to physically game in. Because if you're talking about game shops and board game cafes, the sad reality is that some of them may not survive this, so we may not necessarily have those same spaces. And I also said at the beginning, a lot of my gaming was online before anyway. I think we are going to see online gaming continue forward because people will have become used to it. It will become part of the accepted standard reality of our gaming experience. And that is good because, as we've said, it allows different groups to interact in different ways and hopefully makes the whole thing more accessible to people, which is always good. Let's get more people in here. Let's get new people in here. Let's get them addicted to the hobby as well, so that we've got the next generation coming up behind us. And yeah, there is so much positive about this, particularly on the bringing new people in, exploring new things, interacting with people from different backgrounds and cultures so that we can learn and improve our own gaming practices. That is a really important part of it, I think.
I think you might have just sent one of our listeners into a bit of an existential crisis, thinking that their favourite local game shop might close down.
Buy local.
Support them.
Yeah, go if you want to buy a board game or a miniature or some dice, don't ship it from Amazon. Get it from your local board game shop. I know a couple board game shops in Melbourne were doing like personal deliveries to keep their staff employed. It was just get in your car and go and take this to this person who has ordered this from online. I think Games Lab were doing that in the city for a little while, just to give them a shout out. So definitely support local and look for your local game stores if you want to make sure they're still there after the pandemic ends.
Yeah, I mean, some of them have gone online to actually provide Discord platforms. Certainly, a couple of our local ones have. Right. So they're providing the platforms for online gaming to keep people engaged. If they've got Patreon, Ko-fi, things like that, support them, keep them going. Love your friendly local physical game shops because they do so much in terms of community building, and they really do need everybody's support right now.
And especially, I think, I don't know whether other people are noticing this, but I think some games are taking a bit longer to reach Australia at the moment too. Some of the newer titles, or they're not coming in quite such large quantities. So, make sure that you stay engaged with your game shop. Tell them what you want. Pre-order things. Don't go for the lowest cost option, because if you do that, your local game shop won't be there, and that lowest cost option won't be nearly as low cost anymore. Ellie, did you have another question there, or shall we?
No, there's no more questions from the chat, so shout out if there are more questions, send them through soon.
Yeah, so you're watching At the Table, part of Melbourne International Games Week, and we're talking about gaming in the time of COVID. I guess one of the questions that I had, it sort of came up there, is how about always digital? What are we going to keep doing? But also, what do you think about hybrid play? What do you think about having, 4 people around the table and 2 people on the end of a computer? How do you think that's going to work? Yeah, I kind of feel like Ben feels, I think, from that face.
I would have been like 100% against it in theory before COVID. Like, it's similar to digital dice rollers at the table, we would have people running late for sessions who would call in and would put them on speaker in the center of the table. But it's hard to engage in that kind of way. I'm not saying that I'd say like, no, you're not allowed to do it. But just would, the idea kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies in a weird way. But going forward, maybe not so much, especially if people like, I know myself, I have without going into it, complex medical condition that keeps me indoors probably a little bit longer than other people, just for precautionary reasons. So I would understand if other players were like, look, I understand you guys are going to get together as a group. I still feel most comfortable in my home because of X reason, or I have to travel further, or I have to catch public transport, and, you don't want to risk that at the moment. So can I call in on a screen? And I think, yeah, absolutely. That would be great, if we can set up a laptop for you, especially because, like, everybody's got Zoom now. Everybody's got something, surely. So, they're hopefully, I'm not saying not everyone will have no limitations, but hopefully those limitations are less. And then just quickly, if I may, on the flip side of that, is the idea, and it was what Arc and Forge was originally built for, again, beating you to the punch, Ellie, was not actually playing online, but getting a flat screen TV and putting it down, or some sort of monitor, putting it down flat on the table, and projecting the battle map to that, and using miniatures on the top so that you could create these colourful textured environments but still play with your miniatures that you had painted up and whatever else. I think that after doing the plug, personally, that sounds like a nightmare to me, just in terms of organizational, unless I was going for something very specific. I don't think I could keep up weekly games where I'm carrying around a TV in my backpack to be able to do that. But I think that people who have really enjoyed the digital tools that they've been able to use online may incorporate them into their games in ways such as using, flat screens or projector screens to create digital tabletops, even when the group are there in person. Using sound effects, if you've gotten used to using Arc and Forge or Sirenscape or Spotify to create soundscapes, incorporating those into your in-person games I think we are going to see more of, for sure. And apps, dice rolling apps, that sort of thing.
I liked what you said there about presence as well, that sense of having a computer for individual players. So it's not kind of you've got one computer with 3 people on it and then 3 others sitting around the table, but
Sure.
Rather you've got an individual device for each person that's kind of sitting where they would be sitting, so that if I want to talk to Lynn, I'm talking to the computer that Lynn is on.
Yeah. If you've got the resources to do that, absolutely, that would be cool. And it also makes sure that person isn't lost on the grid of like people that you've got kind of calling in, because engagement, we talked about it being quite hard with these digital games. When you're the only person or 2 people that are not physically in the room, then that presence can be hard to have, especially if there's a delay, and you're like, oh, I was going to say something, but I'm half a minute behind everybody else. Can be frustrating.
I haven't done it myself, but I did see it done last year at the Games Convention, where people hadn't been able to attend through illness, I think, was the main reason. And there was a game going on where they did have a laptop, and I think there were a couple of people on the laptop screen, and they were taking part in the game. So, yeah, it's certainly an interesting thing to explore, and it will be interesting to see how we, as a community, integrate being able to do that. Because as Ben said, even when the situation has gone back to normal, whatever the heck that is going to be, for a lot of people, there are still going to be parts of the community for whom it is not a good idea for them to come out and mix in general. Because let's face it, us all being cocooned away from everybody means that our general levels of immunity to everything else are now gone down, because we're not being exposed to all these, concrud, basically, lurgy from various different sources. So our immune systems are actually getting a bit lazy and sticking their feet up and going, oh, it's nice here, isn't it? Which we're So yeah, I'm intrigued to see where this goes when we do establish whatever our new normal is.
And we get back into a room with 4,000 of our closest friends.
See, I'm legitimately having nightmares about it now. I think there's going to be a lot of unfortunately, potentially, I'm not saying this definitely, I hypothesize that there may be some agoraphobia kind of coming around for some people who become resistant to leave the house. Because I'm not joking, I was having nightmares that I was at PAX like a couple of weeks ago, and it wasn't being at PAX that was the nightmare. It was just like, there's too many people here. Anybody could be a carrier. What's going on? The anxiety levels are going to be high, I think, when it's time for people to come outdoors. So I don't know. I guess that's an endorsement for these digital tools. Sorry, Ellie, go along.
Sorry, no, sorry. I was just thinking, I actually think that this is also opening it up for a great conversation about accommodating other people in general. Do you know what I mean? Going out of your way and making sure that we are making sure that our games are accessible for people, all types of people. And I personally have never had a hybrid game, but I mean, if one of my players needed that, then yeah, we try it, we do it, and we don't hesitate and say, oh, maybe it won't be great. Like, just give it a go, try and make it work in the same way that we as a global community have really gone at having this digital format work for us. I think there's just more accommodation that can be made, and I think we've realized this is a great opportunity for people who are now used to it to continue on that path, I guess.
It's making us think about things in a different way. And this is something that is a slight tangent, but did come up when we've been doing the sort of very early first round play test for Rivers of London. It's like, when you're doing the who goes next in a turn, in a round, and sort of like, we're still thinking very much without, well, you're all around a table, so that's really obvious. Play goes to the right. It's like, well, you can't do that if you're looking at a panel of people on a screen. There is no right or left, because we're all in different positions on different screens to each other. And that is something that we are going to have to rearrange our thinking and start including tools even in physical rule books for, well, if you're doing this online, here's some suggestions for how you manage these situations. What do you do? I mean, one of our playtesters suggested, which is something which was absolutely wonderful, was actually getting a map and working out where people lived and going around geographically, which was hilarious. A bit of a nightmare to do, but it's that real readjustment of thinking. And as you say, let's examine what we're doing. Let's make it more accessible to people, because this is something that we wouldn't necessarily have thought about just going to a physical place to do it. But there are now opportunities that we may not have thought much about or realised that we can take advantage of to widen the field so that more people can come in.
Yeah.
And sometimes physical components are an advantage to playing a game, and sometimes, as you say, they kind of can get in the way a little bit as well. So going around the table, right, that's really easy. You can see it. It makes sense, makes less sense online. But sometimes there are things that perhaps could make a little bit more sense online once we're freed from physical components as well.
I think we've kind of loosely touched on the levels of inclusion that this technology allows us to also be able to get people that have impairments or different situations involved. I know, and I hope I don't get this wrong because I wasn't involved in it personally, but I believe there was a D&D game that was run today for people who were hearing impaired, and it was all just done via text through the Discord rather than verbally. So I think, that I would hypothesize, without thinking too hard about it, that might have been harder to do at a con. I'm not sure. But using just being able to easily type through a Discord or a Zoom or an MSN or whatever it is, makes that very easy, I would think.
My only caveat would be is that we're assuming that everybody has access to this technology.
Of course,
we can't. There are people who just can't afford to have a computer, have internet access. So, for them, access to physical gaming spaces is still important. So we have to be aware that there are always going to be different levels of accessibility based on people's economic circumstances and their health, and everything else. So it's just being mindful of the fact that there are lots of different situations, and whereas technology is going to solve certain problems, it's not going to solve all of them. But we have to make sure that the people that it's not going to solve them for don't get forgotten in the rush towards all the technological solutions as well.
I do have one more question from the crowd, if that's cool, if we can just do that one quickly. This is just any tips for finding games or gaming groups either to join or DM. I assume that this is still in a bit of a online kind of context. Anyone?
If you want to DM, you are going to get swarmed by people because DMs are a dime a dozen. A lack of DMs is honestly part of the foundation upon which I built my business. I'm not going to lie. So there are, Facebook groups are great for it. Discord channels, if you're savvy with Discord. I think I can just name a couple off the top of my head. There's Dungeons and Dragons Australia. There's Melbourne Dungeons and Dragons tables. These are Facebook groups that I'm listing. There's a couple of others. I'm sure that you could potentially try to search Facebook for these sort of groups, and then you just make a post that says, "Hey, looking for a group." I laugh because if you say you're looking for a DM, you're going to get 20 replies of people just going "Yeah, I'll join a game. I'll join a game." But if you say you're looking, sorry, I should clarify what I just said. If you say you're a DM looking for a group, you're going to get swarmed. If you say you're a player looking for a DM, that might be a little bit harder. But it's worth kind of touching base with these sort of online communities. I'm not as savvy or don't know as many. I believe Dungeons and Dragons Australia Facebook page also has a Discord. I could be wrong about that though. So yeah, just kind of checking online social spaces. Those are the ones that I know about. I don't know if you guys are aware of others.
What I said before about reach out to your friendly local game store. They may well be running something virtually. They may well be after DMs to run games for their other customers.
Actually, at the last Dungeons and Distancing as well, there was quite a bit of interest in, we ran a few games, and after every game I had people saying, "Oh, could we do this again? Is anyone else interested in maybe starting a group or something?" So coming to these kinds of conventions actually can absolutely lead to finding a group or finding a DM or whatever is you need, for sure.
We've got a whole 8 minutes left, which is probably 7 by the time I finish talking. So I thought we might do one more just round the room. We've got about 90 seconds each. What will you take away from 2020, from your COVID times gaming experience? What's the thing that either you're going to remember because it was funny or because it was interesting or because it let you do something different? What's your big takeaway?
I can go first, I suppose. Honestly, for me, maybe this is a bit cheesy, but my best mate hasn't really been into tabletop RPGs or anything, and he's one of the ones who's actually started playing with us now that COVID's hit. And so I don't know, spending some quality time showing him something that I'm into has actually just been such a fun thing for me. It's actually been a really, really nice experience. Like we obviously have other things that we do in common, but just having that time to show him that has honestly really been a big deal for me. So yeah, I guess human connection in a different way, as we've already sort of touched on, really has been a positive thing for me. So
I might jump in and then pass to Lynn and then to Ben. And I think, Ben, you suggested this question, so we're expecting something really good from you. No pressure. I think for me, the lesson has been about thinking about why we do things the way we do them and whether there's a better way. So, I talked about how that happened in my research, but also in the way that we play games. Why do we always play games with these particular friends on Saturday nights? Why can't we play them on another night? Why can't we involve people who perhaps live a bit further away or wouldn't normally fit around the table? Let's think about inclusion in different ways and about what we can perhaps shake up a little bit. It's the ice cream for dinner philosophy. Don't just say, no, we can't do it. Think about ways that we can make it happen. Did you?
I was going to say ice cream for breakfast is always a viable option. When I was a molecular biology student, I occasionally did used to have chocolate bars for breakfast because I was, but that's a whole different story. One of the things is that, to be honest, it actually spurred me to run something different. Sort of like go and do different things. I mean, you know what we're like. Gamers are usually collectors. I'm looking at the gigantic collection of games behind Melissa. And obviously you can see this is actually mostly my husband's graphic novel collection. Most of my games are off to the side and in the other room and downstairs and pretty much all over the house. So it's, you buy stuff, you have it, you read it, quite get around to playing it. But this year has certainly spurred quite a few of us to go, I've got this homebrew thing that I actually really fancy going. Anybody up for it? I've got this system I've had for years that I've quite fancied having a go. Anybody fancy trying that? And I think it's been really nice that it's just shaking things up a little bit so that we've gone and done little pet projects that we might not have done, and just tried and experimented with new things, because we're experimenting with a new platform anyway, so why not try it with a new game too?
I don't know if my answer's going to quite live up to the expectations put upon it. I suppose for me personally, I've been on a bit of a journey this year from when we first went online and were chased indoors to now, where I've kind of been slowly learning the advantages of playing online. And I'm going to talk mostly about the technology here, because for me, initially, I hated it. I've mentioned a few times, I'm not a fan of digital dice rollers. I don't, I originally might not have been a fan of kind of using Zoom or Skype to have one player at the table when everybody else is there. But kind of learning how to make that work for myself, and then just the memories of how and when that's worked really well. Something that Arkham Forge does well, yes, I'm going to say it again, is the Fog of War.
Oh my god!
Yeah, I know. I'm just a walking advertisement. I'm not being paid by Arkham Forge for what it's worth. But the other day I had the play. Like, one thing that used to frustrate me previously, because I'm very much about immersion and no metagaming and that sort of thing. And so if I have a grid drawn up and there's a monster behind a wall, the players can see that the monster's there. They might react in different ways because they can see the grid, and removing the token from the grid and then kind of needing to note down where it is at any given time is a pain. With the Fog of War, and other programs use this as well. I think Roll20 has a Fog of War just so, just to even things out. The players went down into a vampire's crypt and they were there to slay the vampire. The crypt was a bit of a maze, so they didn't know exactly where it was. But they knew it was down here somewhere, and it had these magical abilities to kind of, fog its way through walls and things like that. So it was kind of doing hit and run tactics, where it would come through, hit them, and then go back. And so whenever it came to my turn, or the vampire's turn in the initiative order, I'd do something with it, but the players, unless it showed itself, would have no idea what it was doing. They decided to group together in the middle of the crypt, and they were like, all right, let's ready actions, let's stand here in the middle. When it pops out, we're going to pop it. We're all just going to get it. So I had the vampire had an ability where it could sense where they were at any given time because it can smell their blood. That's a very melodramatic sentence. And so it knew that they were all grouped together, so it just went and hid in another room and just waited for them. And I was like, all right, that brings us to the vampire's turn. And on its turn, click, click, click. All right, its turn is over. And the place had no idea what happened. And they were like, well, it's not coming out here for us. I guess we have to go in there for it. And it just created like a sense of anxiety that would have been harder to achieve were it not for the technology. So that's just one anecdote, but little stories like that of how the technology really aided the atmosphere, I suppose.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Look, I think we're out of time now. This has been Gaming in the Time of COVID, brought to you by At the Table and Melbourne International Games Week 2020. And our panelists, Ben Byrne, Ellie Jager, Lynn Hardy, I'm Melissa Rogerson. Thank you, everybody. We hope that that's been interesting, informative, and hopefully a bit entertaining as well. And Lynn, I just have to, give you another opportunity there for a mention. But thank you to all the people who were asking such great questions too. It's been terrific.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you,
everyone.
everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thanks.
And stay safe and enjoy your gaming.
Wear a mask.
Yeah.
Wear a mask.
Are we offline? Are we still in the